My parents were on the stage.
Right.
And vaudeville, if you like,
Yes.
in America, vaudeville
Yes, yes,
showbiz. And I was born on tour. I wasn't
Yes.
quite born in a handbag like
Right.
Oscar Wilde stuff,
No,
I was
quite.
definitely born on tour.
Yeah.
I didn't know what a home was. I was in a
No.
vacuum, a very
Yes.
happy one.
Yeah.
So my parents were very, very happy together. There was no story of my father getting drunk and beating my mother, nothing
no,
like that.
no.
I was very happy. And we worked in the shows
Yeah.
all over England, and I used to go with them.
Mm.
And each week I'd go to a temporary kind of school. I went to about 400 schools
You
in
did?
that time, and learnt nothing.
I was going to say, what did you learn?
Absolutely nothing.
Not a lot.
And then in between shows, we'd do the occasional film work, which was very primitive and rather lovely,
Indeed.
that sort of thing. So that we didn't have a home as such at all until I was about 14.
Right. You did have, I think, an elder brother.
Yes, but he died before I knew him. He died at 7.
Right.
Caught diphtheria and died. And he was going to be someone very important. And he was part of a show, and he used to do step dancing and dancing. He was quite brilliant, but I never knew him.
No.
So when I was born, I was a consolation prize, if you like, that my dad didn't encourage me to do any dancing and things like that. But I was in the chorus girls' dressing room quite a lot in my early youth.
Yes, quite.
And I used to do the splits with them and do all the dancing bit. But I was never allowed to get on the stage, as it were.
But you, in a sort of a way, you had almost a baptism of fire, you may say. I mean, Charlie Chaplin was in actual fact worked with your father.
Yes, they did. And years later, when I lived in Switzerland for a while, I met Charlie, and we were talking about my father, and he remembered him, which I thought was wonderful. And he was, my father used to say that he obviously had tremendous talent. He was always making people laugh, and so that was before he went to America, Kate Carner and so on. But that was an interesting thing.
Yeah, right. Okay. Now you tell me. I think one of the early parts of your career, if I may say so, you mentioned the fact that you saw the ballet dancer Pavlova, and had a particular effect on you. I think.
Yes, it did. I was taken by my mother to see Pavlova, and I thought, of course, it was, as being a child, I must have been about 5, something like that. I was absolutely enthralled, because to me it was absolutely wonderful, and. I felt, I didn't have any innate sense of ballet in that sense, but I felt later on that there might have been some little thing born in me about ballet, because I had a sort of love of ballet later on, which was terrific. But I started, you see, in between shows doing film work.
Yes.
As a kid, I got several pieces of acting to do. I was a kid actor from 1918.
Yeah.
So when people say, "Where did you start?" and I say 1918, they think I'm lying.
Yeah, quite.
It makes me feel like Methuselah. But that was it. I used to do a lot. I played the lead in a couple of films.
Yeah.
And then we'd go off on stage tours, and I used to be in a different house every week, and I used to call the landlady Auntie.
That's right. Quite. Let's just go back just for a second to the schooling. I mean, what was it? What was it like, A, to be always the new boy, and B, to be always the new boy who was that much different by the very nature of your work, your life?
Yes. Well, a new boy isn't sort of accepted into the circle, and he's never really paid much attention because he's just starting. I mean, I didn't pass any exam. I never went into exams. I never had any great friends because it only lasted a few days. And I never failed any exams. That was a different life entirely.
Yes.
But the great thing came when I read a pornographic book by Frank Harris, My Life and Love.
You might have heard of it. Indeed, yeah.
Well, like all people get to read these books, I read it. And the main thing that hit me, apart from the strident sex in it, I suddenly saw that this man was talking about artists, painters, musicians, writers, and all these names. And this was like doors opening, I was fascinated. And I went to Foyle's, the bookshop.
I do.
And books were so cheap in those days.
Yes.
And I bought practically all the books mentioned in his 4 volumes.
Oh, right.
Must have been something like 30 books or something, the one I chose.
Yes.
And I started to read. And it became like a kind of, I was absolutely hooked on it. I never stopped reading since. I've got a big library and I still read,
Yes.
People say, I bet you haven't read all these books. Well, I have most of them. but
Yeah.
I've got them there to read when I want.
When you want, absolutely. Just in passing, so far as Frank Harris is concerned, correct me if I'm wrong, but I've got he was an Ely man, wasn't he?
Was he? I didn't know
Yes,
that.
I think he was. I'll tell you why I think this. I spent some years on the railway and worked for a while at Ely, and interestingly enough, when that book was reprinted, it was for sale on Ely Station at the
Yes.
the bookstall there, and there was a piece in, I think, the Ely Standard laying claim to the fact that Harris was an Ely man.
Really?
So either they'd got it all round their neck or not, as the
Yes,
case
but he
may be.
travelled. Of course, he was the editor
Oh,
of
yes, I
several
know he was.
newspapers.
Yes,
and
but I believe
travelled.
I think
he
his
went
home was
out
Ely.
west to
He did,
America
he
to be
did.
a cowboy and learn
Yes,
about
he
that.
did.
Then he went to Germany to learn all about Goethe, and he went to
That's right.
Italy to learn Italian, to read
That's
Dante.
right.
You
Yes,
know,
quite.
and it was fantastic. What a well-educated man he
Indeed,
was.
indeed, yeah. Your father, I think, became interested in what was then the new entertainment of the cinema.
In a way, yes. My father was a hero to me because he was an athletic man.
Right.
And he played football for Watford. He was a Watford. He played football for Watford, so I've been a fan of Watford ever since.
Oh, yeah.
Although he played football so many years ago,
Yeah.
but he had no real, what should I say, no real education as such that he would be interested in the things that I became interested in.
Right.
But he was mad on sport, mad on football, mad on cricket,
Yeah.
and automatically I also became very fond of sport because
Right.
of the environment from that point of view. But he was very much in love with my mother, and so I had this wonderful, I was in a cocoon of happiness without knowing what the outside world was.
Are you able to say objectively whether you were spoiled or not?
No, not at all.
You were.
On the contrary, I mean, I was spoilt to a certain degree,
Yeah.
except if I upset my mother, I get a whack from my father, and if I upset my father, I get a whack from my mother. I mean, I was disciplined. The
Yeah.
main thing was I must never tell a lie. I mean, you know
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
point in my book where
Yeah.
I went outside and saw a bucket and I wanted to urinate. And I urinated in the bucket, and it was full of very valuable oysters. And the landlady caught me, and I was in trouble. You know,
Yes, quite.
she said, "Did you?" And I said, "Yes, I did." And you know, never tell a lie. That was the whole thing.
Yes, quite. Now, let's just come to your first involvement with film. I think it was in a film called My Son.
My son, yes, 1918.
90. So what did you do in that?
Well, you know, it is God knows how many years
I know.
back.
Yeah,
I remember
it's
it
a long
long,
while.
and I remember that I had to work with Violet Hobson was her
Right.
name,
Yes.
and the director would shout instructions. Was silent, of course.
Yes.
And then I did play a film called Billy's Rose.
Right.
And this was sad because my parents played in it also. They played my parents.
Right.
And it was a dreadful story by the sounds of it, like a Little Nell story, that my sister was sort of very ill and she would love some flowers. And I went outside in the streets
Yes.
and saw a car passed by with a rich couple inside, and the woman threw out some roses, and I went to get them, and I was knocked over.
Yes.
And I was dying, so that my parents had to watch me acting, dying, where their son had died a couple of years
quite.
before, so
Yes.
that was funny,
Yeah.
in a way. And I was more or less automatically, it's a funny thing, you know, you learn things by seeing, and I was in the studios all those years from the time I was 4 onwards,
yeah.
and I would see lamps, the old lamps. I would make up myself with Fleischer, number 5, and
Yes,
the
yes.
lip-sync. And I remember all those things. So gradually, it's a kind of an education, a background. It's in your blood, you know.
Yes, I do. I know what you mean. So early days again. Will Rogers, I think.
Yes.
Talk to me about him, if you will.
That was on a film called Tiptoes.
Yes.
And Herbert Wilcox directed it, by the way.
Oh,
was,
did he?
Yes, he was
Right.
later to become my big boss at
Indeed,
Elstree. But Will Rogers was a tall, amiable person. Of course, people don't know him today, but he was a wonderful talker, and he had this kind of drawl.
Yeah.
But what was so fascinating to me as a youngster was that he had a piece of rope about 20 inches long,
Yes.
which, as he was talking, he'd flick it in the air and tie a knot at the end.
Good Lord.
Now, he taught me how to do it,
Yeah.
but I had to have a little ball at the end so it worked.
So yes.
But I suspect that the actual rope had a weight inside. I
Yeah,
may be wrong
yeah,
with that.
yeah.
That's my suspicion. He also did all the rodeo stuff, you know, and taught me how to do that. He was a marvellous man. And he taught me tricks with bits of stick that, you know, he made all kinds of tricks with sticks and rope and things.
Because I suppose, thinking back, we're talking here about, particularly about Will Rogers and people like that. Well, you're actually associating with people here who, in actual fact, played parts of, shall we say, Western hero folk legends, as it were. But, I mean, some of these people would have remembered them, wouldn't they?
Yes.
I mean, they would have remembered. I mean, for instance, a particularly, perhaps not the best example because he lived so long, was of course Wyatt Earp, who didn't die until 1930.
I know, it's fascinating.
It is when you think.
I went to the place, where the battle was.
Oh,
about 5 years ago.
Oh, right.
And they've still got the old graves in the back, with
Yeah.
the sticks sticking up with the names and things. It's quite fascinating.
In Tombstone.
Yes, Tombstone.
I've not been to Tombstone, though I keep promising myself that I shall go.
Yes.
Because I went to. I went to Calico in Nevada. I don't know, about 10 or 12 years ago, and I did actually meet a man there who remembered Earp,
Really?
remembered Wyatt Earp.
Yes.
When he stood, because by that time, of course, he was living out in California as a
Yes.
landman, real estate man. But anyway, back to this. Now your parents moved to the new studios at Boreham Wood, which I think is now called it's the L Street.
Well, it's
one,
still
isn't it?
Boreham Wood, but
yeah,
I mean, I went
called
there
L Street.
a few days ago, well, a couple of weeks ago actually,
Yeah.
to work on a little film, and it's changed so much. It's
Yeah.
got traffic lights all over the place, and it's full of shops.
That's right. Yeah.
And it was a little village when I went there,
Yeah.
and that was the only time in my life that I went to school for
That's
more
right.
than a week.
That's right. Yes,
And I became
quite.
captain of the school, which was very, very nice for me, and I had a wonderful time there.
But you had to leave, I think, early. 13, 14, something like that, did you?
Yes, well, we moved different places. We've always been a kind of rambler, like gypsies in a way. But I did buy a house. I actually bought a house when I was about 15 or so
Did you?
for £600, a little bungalow.
Yeah.
I must have had a mortgage, but because I was working, I was getting the enormous salary of 15 shillings a week.
Yes, quite.
And after about a year, I got a 5-shilling rise.
Yeah.
But then the film business is like that, there's nothing standard about it. You work and you might have a bit of luck. The director wants 6 cameras one day.
Yeah.
And who can work them? Well, young Cardiff can do one, and I'm now a cameraman.
Yes, indeed.
You get sudden promotion out of left field, as it were.
Yes, I know what you mean. I think one of your early jobs, The Informer.
Yes,
I
the
think
silent
1928, 29, something
28,
like that.
the silent
version.
Lady Putty Lars Hansen.
Right. Now, was this the one where because of course nowadays we think of these things in totally different terms, this was the one where the actress, I think, had to smash or go through the window, smash.
Yes, well, in films today,
Yeah.
for some years, if you've got any glass break, and it's sugar glass, you can do what you like, and it doesn't hurt.
Right.
But we didn't have them in those days. But the only way she had, when her lover, Jipo, the informer, goes downstairs, she knows he's going to die, and she calls out, "Jipo, come back," and she beats the door, which was full of glass panes, with her bare hands.
Yes.
And obviously they were going to break, and obviously she was going to get hurt. So they gave her equivalent to half a bottle of whiskey and got her absolutely drunk, and she beat all the glass with her hands, and it was a wonderful shot. Absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
But it did work.
Now, I think, if I've got my timing right, this was your father by now had become ill,
Yes.
and so effectively, did you then assume the breadwinner role? Or?
Yes, I was. Sometimes my father and mother got the odd sort of extra work or small parts or something, very occasionally. But living was quite cheap and reasonable. And the only thing was that the studios, I was very happy at B&D, were burnt down by fire.
Yeah.
But what I would like to say, if
Yes,
there's time,
please.
is that
Of course there is.
one of the most important things I think about all this is that, as I've already said, I went to so many schools and learned nothing. And it didn't occur to me, but in retrospect, looking back on it, the fact is that I couldn't have had a better environment later,
Quite.
because the film business, in my opinion, is a vast university. Because, for instance, when I directed Sons and Lovers, the average university graduate would go to the library and read Laurence, and he'd study it.
Yeah.
But I actually went to Nottingham. I actually played films in his house.
Yeah.
I actually opened, with the permission of the authorities, I opened the coal mine where his father worked, the actual coal mine.
Yes.
And I made it work. And I was there on the first day shooting. A woman came up to me and said, my mother was Clara Dawes. You know,
It's
all the
incredible.
real characters
Incredible,
came out of it.
yeah.
So in other words, if you're in the film business,
Yeah.
you can learn. I mean,
Yes.
if you do the Charge of the Light Brigade, you go there.
Absolutely.
You know, I've been all around the world so many times, and I've been to all these places. I had to read War and Peace, I don't know how many times.
Yeah, yeah.
And I was up to do Ulysses, Joyce's Ulysses.
Yes.
And I read that until I understood it.
Yeah.
And that unfortunately was never made by me. But the fact was that you have to study all these things. It's like a
Absolutely.
vast university education.
While we're on the subject of Sons and Lovers, and in fact I know the village, and it's only 3 or 4 miles from where I was born, and all the rest of it, and I've worked at the railway station there. Did you get when you went to make the film, what sort of an impression did you get about the way people felt there about Laurence?
There was a certain reticence. I know that when I got back to the hotel after the first day's shooting,
Yeah.
I mean, the background I won't bore you with.
No, no.
We had a producer who was in America. He never
Yes.
came to England, so
Yeah.
I was on my own. The man who was running the show was from the London office, and he was determined to show everybody that we could make a British film very cheaply in record time. So that was my problem.
Yes.
And we were allowed 1 week in Nottingham when I should have had 4 weeks, you know, so I
Yes,
had to
I
work
do.
very fast. The first day shooting, when I got back to the hotel, they said, "There's someone waiting to see you, Mr. Cardiff." So I saw this man come up, and he said, "What are you doing to my sister Miriam?" This is the brother of Miriam.
That's right.
You know, and we had a long talk. He explained a lot of things to me.
Yeah.
So that, again, is another education which the undergraduate wouldn't get by just reading
No,
about it.
no, quite.
But the general atmosphere I gathered was that they weren't mad about him.
That's
There was a
right.
reticence. Isn't that right?
Yes, it is. Absolutely. I just wondered whether or not you had felt it as well, or you
Yes,
had
I
noticed
did.
it as well.
I
Yeah.
did.
Yes, quite. My great grandfather worked there and knew him, and sort of made similar noises actually, and said that he hadn't got much time for him. I mean, obviously, I didn't ask why as many years ago, but he certainly didn't.
Mind you, as a writer, I think he's wonderful.
Oh, there's no question about that at all.
Absolutely.
And Sons and Lovers, perhaps among the best.
Yes.
I mean, wonderful, absolutely wonderful book without
I
any
was
doubt
so
at all.
thrilled to have the opportunity.
I
to
should
make
think
that.
so as well. I should think so. How did you square? I mean, I know that you fought great battles to get Wendy Hiller to play the mother,
Yes.
and indeed to get Trevor Howard to
Yes.
play the father. And may I say again, what inspired casting.
Yeah.
But you still had to have Dean Stockwell in as Paul.
Well, that's very interesting.
Political,
Yeah,
isn't
it's very
it?
interesting. I had my battles to get Trevor and Wendy. When I said I'd like to have Wendy, the man in London in charge looked at me like I was an idiot. He said, "She's in a play in New York. That's out. Forget it." You know.
Quite.
And then I read in the paper the next morning that the play had folded. And I rang her in New York. I managed to get her number. And I said, "Would you like to?" She said, "I'd love to do this." And I went to Bob Goldstein, this man, and said, "Bob, I can get Wendy Hiller." So that was it.
Yeah.
I had the same trouble getting Trevor, but I managed to get him. Well, then I got Mary Ure on it. It was great,
Yes,
you know.
yes.
And I had a wonderful cast, but I couldn't find the right man. I was tested. I tested so many people. There were good actors, and the grim joke about the whole business, and I'm sure you know, is that if I've got a perfect script, and
Yeah.
I went to the Money Boys and
Yeah.
said, "Here it is, it's Sons and Lovers, a wonderful script," and so on, they'd say, "Don't want to read it. Who's in it?" And if I said, big star, they'd say, "Great. How much money do you want?"
That's right.
No problem. But if I said I've got these great actors, and there are great actors in this country who could have played young Laurence
Yeah.
perfectly,
Yeah.
but they weren't box office. That's
No.
what they want.
Right.
So on top of that, I had a call from Hollywood, from the big boys, saying, "Cardiff, what the hell are you doing?
Yeah.
Listen, kid, this is an American film with American finance to be shown all over America, and you got to cast, who's Wendy Hiller, for God's sake? Never heard of him, So I was in the doghouse, and they said, "Listen, if you want to finish this picture, you want to do this picture, we want you to have an American play the lead, and it's got to be
Yeah.
Dean Stockwell."
Yeah.
So that was it. I either had to do that or go off the picture, and I preferred to stay on the picture.
And this was 1960?
Yes.
1960. When 4 miles from where you were, all you'd got to do was to ring Nottingham 46816 and I'd have come and done it.
They're coming down.
You see,
Yeah, you
and that was
are.
the right age.
What I missed.
Well, there you are, didn't we all? Now, if we can talk now about, I know that you also encountered Hitchcock, another controversial figure.
Yes, a
Talk
great
to me
man.
about him. I mean,
Well, Hitch stands out a mile in one sense, that of all the directors I've worked with, and I've worked with Houston, great
Yes.
director,
Yes.
and other directors, Rennie Clare was a marvelous director,
Mm-hmm.
and Henry Hathaway was funny in his sense. Great directors, King Vidor, for instance, but
Mhm.
Hitchcock stood out from them because he was bored making the film.
Mm.
He put everything into preparing the film.
Mhm.
All his artistic ideas, and he had so many,
Yeah.
were on the page of that script.
Yeah.
And he would never touch it afterwards.
Right.
And when I did the film with him, where we did the whole reel in one take, which was the most incredibly difficult thing ever,
Yeah.
he was. I remember seeing him one day when we'd finished shooting this incredibly difficult, the whole reel in one take, you know. And when it was over, he was looking at the floor. He never watched the actors. He said, "How was that for you, Paul? That's my operator."
Yes. Yes.
Paul said, "Okay, sir." I said, "Right, that's it." And there was no sort of watching by the camera. Has he got the right mood?
No.
He very rarely saw the rushes,
Right.
but he knew the script was right. He knew he'd got the right things.
Yeah. So he tied the script chapter and verse. You're saying?
Yes.
I see.
And I got the best compliment from Sons and Lovers from him, incidentally, because I was his cameraman. And what he thought of me as a cameraman, I'll never know, because it was one of those films when, you know, if someone had said, "What do you think of the photography of that?" they'd say, "Well, it was all right, fair enough." They didn't realize that I had to light 8 sets at once and track through and walls opening and God knows that. But anyway,
Yeah.
when I went back after the film to Hollywood, and I ran into Hitch, and he looked at me like gave me a long stare, and he said, "I saw Sons and Lovers last week." I said, "Yes." And he looked at me with a kind of wonder and a kind of funny look in his face. He said, "It was good. It was bloody good."
Mm.
Now that was a compliment for Hitch.
Absolutely.
The expression was, "How could an idiot like you make such a great film?"
Yeah.
You know,
He was
that
mystified by your
mystified.
capabilities.
It was a sort of Irish compliment. In a
Yes,
way.
I know what you mean. I know what you mean. Is it possible? I mean, have I read that he was a very laying aside his professional side. I mean, what sort of a man was he apart from that? I mean, I know he was a practical joker.
He had an enormous. Funny enough, I equate him often with Edgar Wallace. You remember Edgar Wallace?
Right. Yes.
Edgar Wallace was a sort of man of the same intellectual capacity, I would think, as Hitchcock.
Right.
Because Edgar Wallace, uneducated, he sat on a hill when he was in the army and he used to read the dictionary until he knew it all by heart, you know, that sort of education. But Hitch was a man that had this innate sense of drama, like Edgar Wallace had.
Yeah.
And he would feel something that was absolutely, that made the scene. And that was the thing that the audience loved. And that's something the other directors didn't have so much of. He had an innate sense of drama. Incidentally, in his own life, I used to have so many lunches and dinners with him. He had an enormous sense of humor, a very cruel sense of humor.
Did he?
It's in my book, but the most dreadful things he did. You know, just one quick one.
Yes,
Well,
please.
his assistant director told Hitch that he was getting married that weekend.
Yeah.
And would Hitchcock be very kind, because he had no car, would Hitch lend him one of his cars to go to the Mexican border to have the weekend with his new wife? Hitch said, "Be my guest, take one of my cars." And after he'd left, Hitch phoned the police and said his car was stolen.
No.
And this poor man, when he got to the border, he was arrested and spent his honeymoon in jail. That sort of thing is diabolical.
Yes, of course it is.
But that's the sort of things that he did. Unbelievable.
I suppose, was it not also because men like Hitchcock in Hollywood at that time, and men like his peers, like Hitchcock and his peers, were so incredibly powerful, weren't they?
Yes, he was powerful, but Hitch wasn't the sort of person like DeMille was.
No.
I mean, I didn't work with DeMille, but I've watched him at work in Hollywood, and of course, unbelievable. You know, he had one of the directors I worked with, Henry Hathaway. When he'd started as a prop man, he had to carry a chair behind DeMille. You know.
Yes.
And DeMille would sit down,
I've heard
knowing
that.
You know, that's
I've
true.
heard that. Yeah.
And if DeMille didn't like someone and he just phoned somewhere and said something, that man would never work again in the film business. That was a sort of
Power.
tyranny that he had.
Yes, quite.
But Hitchcock wasn't like that.
Well, I mean, one or two of them you mentioned. I know Hal Rawson, the cameraman, also very autocratic. But you didn't put up with that, I think. with him?
No, I think I likened it to the fact that if a soldier's got a gun in his hand, the officer says you've got to climb out there and you're going to be shot with machine gun fire. It's actually suicide, and you know it, and you start walking.
Yeah.
Nothing you can do about it.
No, quite.
All the other operators have been fired in the studios
Yeah.
where I worked. So when they said, Cardiff, you've got to go, you're the last.
Yeah.
I thought, this is it, I'm going to be fired. So I thought, well, the hell with it, and I was rude to him. And everyone had been so subservient and crawling around this man, you
Yes,
know,
yes.
almost on their knees, that when I went out and said, look, Al, I don't like that, I'm not going to do it that way, you know, he couldn't believe it.
No.
But I stayed with him for 2 years, and that was a big friendship.
Did you then? Okay, if you stood up to him and therefore he backed down, as most people of that kind will, if you actually stand up to them, they will back down because
That's right.
essentially they'll prey on people who let them. Did you, by doing that, learn enough to make a profit from him? Did you learn from him?
Yes, I did. I mean, an operator is the one stage before
Yeah.
you become a lighting
Yeah,
man.
yeah.
And as an operator, you have to look through the camera
Yes.
all the time.
Yeah.
And a good operator can whisper to the cameraman, you know, Jack, that light's a bit hot at the back.
Yes,
And,
yeah.
I didn't know you had that in or something, you
Yes.
know. So that they become friends and cooperative. And I was able to pick up a lot of lighting ideas from Hal, because he was a very good cameraman.
Also, I know that I want to also mention the business of the trip to Paris. It may be slightly out of time, but it's worth mentioning it in case we don't get everything in. You were sent to Paris. Why?
Do you mean after the fire?
No, yes, your let's put apostrophe commas heroism then.
Yes.
You did a bit of rescuing.
I had a big friend, Ted Moore, who was my operator.
Yeah.
He was my assistant when I was an operator, and we sort of grew up in various ways together
Yeah.
in promotion. And when I was an operator, he was my assistant. And we used to play tennis together, and we used to go to London. We had this battered old car. We were great friends. And one night we came back, and I'd just gone into bed, and Ted phoned me and said, Jack, the studios are on fire. And in my pajamas, I rushed round with a jacket over me, I remember. And as I was probably smaller than the others, I was put through the window of the camera department and dropped on the floor to open windows to get people to go in.
Yeah.
And as I went in the corridor, I saw these massive timbers and girders falling down. It was
Yeah.
blaze. I was terrified.
Yes.
But we saved 14 cameras that night. And next morning we thought we'd be sort of heroes, but it wasn't the case. It was the reverse, because they were all heavily insured, and the management were very unhappy that we'd saved all these cameras.
Oh, yeah.
But one camera
Yeah.
was a new camera brought over on APRO by
Yeah.
the French,
Yes.
a Debris.
Yes.
And that wasn't insured, and they were delighted that we saved it. And I think they gave Ted Moore £15, and they gave me a holiday in Paris for 3 days, which was fascinating.
Very nice.
That was breaking the ice. I mean,
Yeah.
that was wonderful.
Yeah. Laurence Olivier, Sir Laurence Olivier, Lord Olivier,
Lord Olivier.
worked with him early on.
Yes, several times.
Late 30s, I think, first time. Was it?
Yes, I think the first time was As You Like
As
It.
You Like It,
As You Like It.
yeah.
He played Orlando, and he was a wonderful man.
Was he?
Oh yes, I thought he was wonderful. I mean, a great, great actor. And I remember that on As You Like It,
Yes.
Hal Rosson was the cameraman,
Yes.
and he one day phoned in. He was sick; he couldn't turn up.
Right.
And the producer said, Cardiff, look, we're lucky. We've got a very important Hollywood cameraman passing through London, Lee Garnes, who
Yeah.
had just won an Oscar.
Right.
And he's consented to come down for the day and light this enormous set in the Forest of Arden. But in the meantime, Cardiff, look, put a few lamps on,
Yes.
try and get things organised, you know, then he'll do it up finally. So this was a break, but I mean, I was terrified because I had about 200 arc lamps to light this forest.
Yes.
And I was lighting the best things I could, you know, putting beams of light here and there.
Yes.
And the great man turned up at midday.
Yes.
And the producer welcomed him. He came on the set and he was introduced and so on. He said, well, young Cardiff here, he's put a few lamps on, but now you'll take over. And Lee looked at the set and he said, looks great the way it is, let's go.
Oh my God.
And that was a great thing to do.
I think so.
I mean, he could have said, well, yeah, I'm just
We'll
moving a few
shift
lamps,
this, we'll shift that,
you know, but
yeah.
he didn't. And that was great. He was a great guy.
Didn't do your credibility any harm, did it?
No, one of the guys I was lighting was a young Laurence Olivier.
Indeed. Yes, quite.
Then I've worked with him finally, of course, on the Marilyn Monroe
Yeah, the
picture.
Prince and the Show girl.
And that was very, very funny and horrible, and all kinds of emotions on that.
I'll come to that in a bit if we get half a chance. I'd like to talk about that as well. Corda, when Denham opened, Corda, I mean, you were then literally cluttered with stars, weren't you?
Absolutely.
I mean,
The
Lawton,
big studios at
Dietrich.
Denham, every big name was there. I mean, I was saying that in the restaurant you could see all kinds of people. You might see great stars, George Bernard Shaw or someone like that. You might see Prince somebody, or royalty would be sitting down with all kinds of people from Parliament, prime ministers and things.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. All the big shots were there with all these big stars that came over from Hollywood, made a few films, went back. And we had great cameramen over from Hollywood. That's
Yeah.
where I made the decision. I could have got promotion to be a cameraman much earlier, but I decided to stay as I was an operator
Yeah.
and work with the big boys to learn more. And I think I was right, because I learned a lot from the Hollywood cameramen.
Right. Now, I don't know whether I read it right or not. I used to do a program here, an in-depth interview program, which used to last for about half an hour every week. And some of the people were quite notable celebrities. I don't know whether you found the same as I did. It seemed to me, when I interviewed them, the higher stature they had attained in their work, the more gracious they appeared to be.
Absolutely.
Is that
You're
right?
So right.
Well, I'm glad you said
No,
that.
Not only that, but I mean, the people I've sort of looked on with awe, they never looked down on me.
That's right.
I mean, Noel Coward, when I met him, first of all, we became good friends. He always treated me as though we were old friends. He
Right.
never condescending.
No.
And John Betchman, for instance.
Indeed.
I had lunch with him once or twice, and he treated me as an old friend, and I'd only just met him.
Yes.
And that's true what you said, that the really great ones
That's right.
have got this extraordinary thing that they will never look down and talk down to you.
It is absolute. I just wondered whether it was me. I remember one of the people that that comes to mind particularly was well, actually there were several of them, but particularly Sir Michael Hordern.
Yes.
I had arranged to interview him in London one night, and so I went up there, and I'd got to arrive at 7 o'clock at Rectory Chambers, where he lived, his London home, and I did the interview with him. Well, he had just been widowed. Lady Hordern had died quite recently, and of course they'd been married many years, as you know, and he was a bit lost, one's bound to say. And anyway, I did the interview. Well, by 7:45, I'd finished. And I said, well, thank you very much for your time. And he said, oh, is it necessary for you to go yet? So I said, well, no, not really. So he said, well, let's sit and talk. And we sat, and I was mesmerised by this man till nearly midnight.
It's very nice.
And charm itself.
Yes.
And took very great care to be very accommodating and very kind.
Yes,
and I
it's
thought then,
wonderful.
well, there's another big one
Yes.
that knows he's got nothing to prove.
Yes,
If you
that's
follow
right.
me. Wonderful. You have, I think, especially warm memories. I mean, we speak of these people who we shall never know, and you just simply have warm memories
They're all
of
dead.
people like Marlena Dietrich.
Yes.
I mean, talk to me about her.
Well, I knocked her over in the passage, in my book, and
Right, yes.
I was terrified that she was going to hit me, because she was she was probably so shattered by being knocked over, because I was late for work and I rushed
Yes.
around and knocked her flat. Anyway, we became very good friends. I was the kid. I think she had a kind of mother feeling about
Yeah.
me, or nothing more than that. But she, when I had a cold, she phoned to Germany for a prescription that she said was very good for colds. And she was that sort of woman. She was very
Yes.
sort of friendly, helpful, nice. She had worked, as you know, with Joseph von Sternberg, and he was a great cameraman, and he directed quite a lot of pictures, but he was a great cameraman. And she had learnt so much about lighting. And when on this picture with Harry Stradling was the actual lighting man,
Yeah.
and she had a full-length mirror by the side of the camera, which she used to watch the lighting, and sometimes she'd say, Harry, I think the kicker light could be a bit hotter, and what about the back, And Harry would whisper to me, God damn it, she's always right. But he was a wise enough man to say, yes, Molly, you're right.
That's right.
And so she had this mirror. Then Bob Donat, who was the co-star,
Oh, yes.
he got angry and he complained to Alexandra Korda in his office. He said, first of all, it's favoritism. He said, Jack Cardiff, the operator, always puts Marlene are in the centre, and I'm on the side of the screen. And Harry's straddling. When he's lighting, all I get is leak light. And Corder was like the headmaster. He had us in like the headmaster's study. And I could see that his eyes were twinkling a bit.
Yeah.
He said, we must watch it and be more careful.
Well, I mean, we can't pass that, of course, without mentioning, and I want to come back to Day Trick in a minute, but we can't go by the fact that, of course, Donut, I think, made his debut up here at the Festival Theatre, didn't he?
Yes.
So you'd worked with him as well. But what sort of a man was he? Because he was not a well man, was he?
No, he wasn't. No, it's quite true. But he was a very fine actor.
Was he? Yeah.
And a very serious actor and a charming man, really charming. But I remember that at one stage, he was working on a film, The Magic Box.
Yes.
With Peter Michael Redgrave.
Yes.
And at that time, Bob was beginning to forget his lines.
Right.
It was very, very embarrassing, very sad. And we had this one scene where we were doing shot after shot, and Bob was drying, fluffing. And Michael Redgrave was always word perfect.
Yeah.
Every take.
Yeah.
And it got to about take 18, and I whispered to the director, John Bolting, I said,
Yeah.
John, ask Michael to dry once, see what happens.
Yeah.
Good idea. So he goes to Michael, and Michael said, well, all right, yes. Okay. The next take, he fluffed, dried. And he said to Bob, Bob, I'm terribly sorry, old man, I'm awfully sorry. And Bob said, that's all right, chap, that's all right, fine. Next take, we got it. It's just pure psychology.
Incredible.
And that's the sort of thing. But he was a marvellous actor, a good stage actor.
Marlene Dietrich, then, very early on in the business of stripping, did it very early, didn't she?
Oh, yes. Well, we had this incredible scene. In those days, the floors were all done with a kind of hessian.
Yes.
And then paper on top of that. This made the clumps quieter, so we didn't get the clump of footwork.
No.
So it's supposed to be a bedroom in Russia, no, a bathroom in Russia.
Right.
And you had this imitation woodwork, which was really paper.
Yes.
And the scene was that Marlene's in a bath, and that's it. It was a very interesting scene, very short.
Yes.
Saturday afternoon, no problem. And she turns up on the set with this wonderful white dressing gown with her maids either side with towels. Comes on the set, sits in the bath. As she took off her gown, she was stark naked. Now, usually she has a swimsuit on or something. No, she was stark naked. So we were absolutely staggered. And there were only a couple of electricians on the set to start with.
Yes.
Within half an hour, there were about 30 electricians all the way around, holding lamps, technically,
Yes,
And anyway, we did take after take. And each time she got out of the bath, she'd get on this paper floor, and the maids would fling the towels quickly, so we didn't see much,
No.
Finally, we got to the last shot. The director, who was rather annoyed by the whole thing, because the place was crowded with people.
Yes.
He said, thank you, Miss Dietrich, that'll be all, that'll finish for today. And so she's getting a bit cocky now, and she gets out of the bath quickly and steps out with the floor, which had got soapier and soapier. And she slips and falls whap with a bump on the floor. And, what do you do if you're a perfect gentleman? You rush forward to help her, but you can't, she's stark naked.
Quite.
Anyway, she was trying to get up and kept slipping down all the time. And finally, she managed to get to her feet. She roared with laughter. That was the sort of person she thought it was a very funny thing. And we got her off the set. And I cut the piece of floor out where her bum had fallen, and she signed it afterwards. I still got it.
Very nice.
But she actually was a brilliant technician in a way, because she made up her face. She had a turned-up nose.
Yes.
She hated profiles for that reason.
Yes.
But she used to make a straight line down the nose, so that the nose looked straight. And she used to paint the inside, the pink part here, white. Painful enough, because it gave her eyes that extra brilliance. And she'd always have a light 45 degrees
to come down
make the shadow here and the shadow there, and she had the makeup arranged. So she knew her lighting. She made up for the lighting. And I would say, without being too unkind, I wouldn't think she'd win Oscars for acting. But she had this
She's got this quality.
rather monosyllabic German accent.
Yes, indeed.
But
a presence, nevertheless.
Presence was terrific, very sexy.
Technicolor arrives, and in fact, I think you were originally going to be invited to go to America to learn this new system, but it turned the other way, didn't it?
Yes, they built a labs. They built a labs instead. And I was automatically on the staff of Technicolor. I was by then a kind of junior cameraman, so I didn't go. Someone said the other day, a couple of weeks ago, they're doing they're doing a documentary about my life, which
Yeah.
is something else.
Mm.
And I hated it because I had to go on the set for a week and be made up, and
Oh, yeah.
that I hate more than anything. Although it brought back memories from a long time ago. Anyway,
Just let me just stop you there, because so you go on, you do a document. They put you on a set, they make you up. They're doing a documentary about you. It's a bit like treating a doctor, surely. If you know what it's like, a doctor treating a doctor. Did you spend the entire day looking around and saying, "Well, I wouldn't do that"?
Yes, in a way, but worse than that.
Yeah.
What happened was, everyone's lost in their own jobs. That's fair
right.
enough,
That's
whatever
right.
you're doing,
That's right.
You don't say, "Well, I must be careful
No,
about his work."
that's right.
You're concerned with your own. So I would be the on stage, as it were. I had all these lights on me, which I didn't like very much, and I made up. And I know they're going to ask lots of questions, like we're doing now.
Indeed.
But I had to be ready to sort of give out.
That's right.
And I'd be ready, and I'm thinking, I want to remember the names now. It was Marilyn Monroe, Sophie Ronaldo, and I'm getting all these names because
right.
they'd appear and I'd have to name them.
Mm.
And I'd be ready. And then, right, here we go, fellas, let's quiet, here we're going to shoot. Okay, ready? And someone said, the cameraman said, just a minute, Charlie, is that flag dropped a bit? Well, look, put it the other side. And no, take it up a bit higher, Fred. Where's the, And I'm starting to think, oh my God, why, I'd get so fed up and furious because all the things that happen.
Yeah.
And I think all cameramen and all directors should go through that just to see what it's like for an actor, because I felt tremendous sympathy with these actors who are, learning lines is tough.
Yeah, quite.
At any time.
Yes, it is.
It's like someone on stage, just as you're going to hold in a minute,
Yeah, that's right.
So I learned that lesson a couple of weeks ago.
And the other thing is that, as you say, not only does it throw you, but it stops, it also stems or stalls your emotion, doesn't it, as well?
Oh, absolutely.
If you're going forward and then
sometimes it works in another way. When I
Yes.
worked with Henry Hathaway, we had Tyrone Power as its star, who was very handsome, lovely man, great friend. He'd come on the set doing his own makeup, and say, "Jack, I had this camera last week. What do you think?" And he doesn't worry about his lines at all, He's happy.
Yeah.
And he had to be knighted in this scene by
Right.
the king.
Right.
And so we did the first take, and he kneels down and looks up with a sort of half smile. Nothing, absolutely nothing there in the face.
Right.
So Hathaway gave me a sort of wink, and he said, "Jack, take that gobo away." I said, "Henry," because I understood now. I said, "Henry, I've got to have that gobo there because it's gobo in the light." He said, "Jack, I can't waste time talking. Look, I want that gobo taken away." And we had this big row, and Tyrone's standing, ready to go, but he's thinking, "What's happening?
What's going on?"
I'm having a hell of a row." I said, "Look, I don't care. I'll walk. I'm fed up with the whole picture. We're having a terrible row on the set." And Hathaway's, we're acting like mad. Finally, Tyrone loses his temper, and he says, "Oh, for God's sake, Hathaway!" And Hathaway says, "Roll him." And Tyrone Power kneels down. His face is all contorted with the bad temper that he's had.
Yes.
Looked wonderful as he's being knighted. It was a wonderful scene.
Yeah.
This is
Yes,
the
I know what you
director
mean.
using the psychology.
Yes, quite incredible. Now, I know that you also. Let's talk now about the coronation, George VI's coronation, and the fact that you clouted him.
Oh yes, yes. Technicolor. It was such an important occasion that we were actually going to photograph the king in Buckingham Palace Gardens, and therefore we didn't just have a few boys. I was probably the youngest, but we had the heads of Technicolor working the Technicolor camera. If you know what I mean.
Yes, I do.
And it was a very important occasion. But I had to take the focus. In other words, when you take the focus, you put the end of a tape measure by the lens and you run it out.
Yeah.
There's a hook, and you hook the end of the tape on.
Yes.
And you run it out to
Right.
the person's face.
Yes.
And I was so urgent. I ran it out at speed and hit the king right on the face, right smack on the nose. And I was so horrified. I said, "I'm terribly sorry." And the king turned to Baldwin, who was standing next by, and he said, "That's what." He said to Baldwin, "He could go to the Tower for that, couldn't he?" Stanley said, "Yes, sir, that he would." Yes. And that was lovely. And then when I took the tape to Stanley Baldwin,
Yes.
Stanley Baldwin said, "No side pockets, please," and that set the king off. He was giggling.
Yes.
I think he'd had a big lunch and
Right.
probably wine or something, but he was in a very friendly, happy mood.
Yeah. Since you mentioned Baldwin, I mean, did you know him any more than that?
No.
You didn't. It was just, as it were, a one-off.
Yes, I mean, the thing was, when we did the coronation film, that's
Yes.
what it was all about.
Yes, of course.
It was very funny because we had certain scenes where all the nobility and the land was in this large room, sometimes the palace, where we went all over the place. And they looked like a bunch of extras in their costumes, put makeup on. They looked just like ordinary extras.
Yeah.
And we had an American cameraman at one stage where we asked permission of the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Lambeth Palace, is that
Yes,
right?
yes.
And we said, Your Grace, would you mind if we could come there just for a few minutes to take a photograph of Your Grace? And he thought it was going to be a very ordinary, simple thing. He said yes. And when he arrived at the palace, he saw these big generators outside with all these cables and things. They were cables. And we went inside, and there were all these lights. There was one light right near a Murillo painting nearly burning. And he said, what are you doing here? And Bill Wall, the cameraman, Wall said, hey, Gracie, can you come over here? Can you get over here so I can see? And he was calling Gracie.
Yeah, Gracie.
Because he was so staggered, he did what they said.
Now, what else? You mentioned to me earlier, I think, that you had other, well, I don't know, without going into too much detail, some other difficult jobs during your wartime, the business of seeing these people and the injuries.
Oh, yes. I had to go to, Sir Harold Gillies, who did this wonderful using other parts of the body and makes all these sort of repairs on the face and whatever. And I had to go up there with a Technicolor camera and photograph these dreadful things that had happened. One guy was pinned underneath in a bomb hole and boiling water on his face from an escaped jet, and his face was not much left of his face. I had to go, on another occasion, I had to go to London to photograph a Jewish girls' club where they'd all been killed and things like that. It was really sordid stuff. And certainly, in the case of Sir Harold Gillies, I had a young assistant called Jimmy Wright, who was a very handsome boy. He really was handsome.
Yes.
He was about 18, I think, and a very good-looking boy. And he had to go outside and be sick because it was almost unbearable to watch the things that I had to photograph. The thing was, he was desperate to fly because his father had been quite a hero in the previous war. He got the job, and he went up in the air, and almost immediately he was shot down and blinded completely. So from that moment onwards, he died a couple of years ago, actually.
Oh, right.
And but he was quite well known in the film business. He would come on the set sometimes. But it was a terrific experience to be in because you realise what we only saw a fraction of it, what really went on.
Did you, without getting terribly philosophical about it, having seen that kind of thing and having been that near to death in so many ways, did it do anything to you in terms of the way you thought about life afterwards, as opposed to the way perhaps you'd thought about it before? Did it move you?
It gave me a certain, I don't know the right word, bitterness or whatever, certain cynicism about politicians.
I see. So we came out of the... I'm not going to argue with you. I'm not going to argue with you. My views on that are well known. So you came through, thank God you came through the war. So we're now at the end of the war. So what next, Jack? What happened then?
Well, I was of course terribly ambitious, and I wanted to get on like everyone else does. And Technicolor was just sort of starting up again on the commercial side. But I ran into the old thing, Catch-22. I was one of the few people in this side of America who had been trained in Technicolor. Yeah. But I had not yet photographed a big feature film. Right. Yep. I mean, Western Approaches was not a big feature film. It was a super documentary, a realistic film. But it wasn't like a visiting card by any means. But the producer would say, well, let's see what you've done. I hadn't done anything. You see, this was the Catch-22 thing. And on one occasion, the director of a certain film called Handel.
Oh, yes. Early Technicolor.
Yes. He wanted his cameraman on the film. And the cameraman, who, funnily enough, was the son of arguably one of the inventors of the camera, the movie camera, William Freeze Green.
Indeed.
This was Claude Freeze Green, his son. And I worked with him. I had worked with Freeze Green as a junior boy, Yeah. And Claude said, well, I don't know how to photograph in colour. I never have photographed in colour. He said, I can't do this. And the Technicolor people said, well, Jack Cardiff is the man you want because he knows Technicolor. He's done a lot of work. And the director said, well, very nice, but I want my own cameraman, as usual. So Claude had a brilliant idea. He said, I tell you what we'll do. Let Jack start the film, and I'll watch it for a couple of weeks, and I'll take over.
Right.
So that's what we did. I mean, it was good for me because I had a break, but it was really Claude's film as a cameraman, and after that he took over.
Yeah.
But even then, after that, I couldn't get the proper break I wanted. And I was working on the second unit, and on the second unit you do all the odd scraps.
Yeah.
If you've got an important sequence, and the only shot left to do is a close-up of an ashtray,
Yeah.
the director said, well, don't worry about that, let the second unit do that.
That's right.
So
That's right.
Let's move on, let's
Yeah.
do on the important things. So that's what I did. I did all the jobs like close-ups of ashtrays, whatever, headings on a letter, or things like that. Well, there was one particular thing I had to do, which was a wall which had animals' heads on it with horns.
Yeah.
And it was very difficult to light because it made multiple shadows, naturally. But I had all the time in the world to do it, and I did a pretty good job on it. And I heard a voice say, very interesting, and I turned around, and there was the great Michael Powell.
Yeah.
And he was staring up at it, and he said, would you like to photograph my next film? I said, oh, yes, Mr. Powell, I would very much. So he said, well, we start in 3 months. And he'd gone, and he was that sort of man. He just dashed on and dashed off. And I thought, well, he's just said that. It's a nice thing to say, but he's going to forget all about it, you know. And I was in Egypt, again on the second unit, Caesar and Cleopatra. And I had a telegram from him saying, where the hell are you? We start in 3 weeks. So I got permission to come back to England and started on A Matter of Life and Death, which was my first feature film.
Right. On which I think you met David Niven.
Yes.
Did you get to know him?
Oh, yes.
You did?
He was a great raconteur. He really was. And he had a terrific sense of humour. And he told me things that, very funny things, but one of the things he told me I put in my book, and I felt I had a right to put it in my book because he told me. The fact he had it in his book later, I had it in my book as well.
Yes.
When he was actually playing in Wuthering Heights.
Yes.
And he had to bend over his wife who was dying and cry.
Yes.
And David said, he said, I can't. He said, I'm sorry, I never cry. I can't cry. So that's it. You know. And the director said, don't worry. We just put a little menthol up the nose, and you just strain, and out comes the tears.
Yes, that's
all right, okay, so that's it. So they get all set up, and they put the menthol up the nose, and say, right, here we go, lights, camera, action, all that stuff, and action. So David bends over Merle Oberon, who's dying, and he strains, and he strains, and he strains. And suddenly a lot of green snot comes out of his nose and falls on the corpse, who wakes up and says, Christ, it was a terrible scene. And that was one of David's stories. It was quite true. So
Yes,
I used it in my book. Why not?
And why not? No. I think then another film with Michael Powell, another classic, Black Narcissus.
Yes.
You also worked on. That was filmed, I think, was it the Himalayas?
No, it was filmed entirely in the studios.
Right, I thought it was done in the Himalayas.
A lot of it. Some people actually wrote and said they knew these places. They didn't.
Right, there's another one then. There's another one. Right, and you got, I think. Now let's see. I'm just having a look at mine now. There was an Oscar for that. Yes.
Yes, I got the Oscar for that.
Yes, quite.
Actually,
Go on.
Getting to know, having the luck to have been chosen by Michael Powell as a cameraman was the biggest thing in my life. It was a watershed of the highest degree.
Yeah.
And he was a sort of director that's a cameraman's dream because he was alert, alive, he was full of ideas, full of ways to try to do things differently. I said to him, when we did A Matter of Life and Death, which is about heaven, I said to him, I suppose heaven's going to be in colour and the earth in black and white. And he said, no, the reverse. And I said, why, Michael? So he said, well, because people expect that. He said, I want to do it differently. Just because of everyone thought that heaven would be in colour, he made it in black and white.
Yes.
And he received any kind of idea. I had lots of ideas, always have done. And he never said, oh, I think it's a bit risky. He said, do it, I love it. He was incisive and terrifically encouraging for ideas and creative ideas. So I was very lucky to get with him.
This, before we leave this part, this very early Technicolor work, before we move on from that, you mentioned several times that in fact you were one of the very few who were trained to attend to Technicolor filming as opposed to black and white. bearing in mind my complete lack of technological know-how and knowledge, how was it so profoundly different? Are you able to explain to the layman?
Well, I can, because it's been said so many times, and really I have to say, I have to be honest about this. There isn't a great deal of difference. There was a certain mysticism at first,
Yeah.
an arcane kind of world. This is colour and it's all different. I mean, light is light and lighting is lighting, you know, and
Yes.
front light, back light, you name it. Where it became different is that the film, black and white film, had certain things like a certain latitude in the shadows, so that you could put very little light into the shadows, and the latitude of the film stock would register it. But with Technicolor, number one, first of all, it needed about 10 times more light than black and white. So you had to light on a high key, with a very high key, with arc lights. Whereas in black and white, you could use soft inky lights, which is much easier to work with.
Yeah.
Working with arc lights is quite a job. But you'd soon get used to it. In fact, what actually happened over the first few years, you know, many cameramen who were well-known cameramen, they just went into Technicolor because they could see what the situation was.
Yeah.
It wasn't such an arcane thing. It was something that they could adapt, and I think it was quite, it was overdone. I mean, this mystic business was overdone. I did 3 films in a row with Michael.
Yes.
There was Matter of Life and Death, Black Narcissus,
And the Red Shoes. Yeah.
And then I went on, it's all in the filmography in my book, and then I went on to do several other films, Scott of the Antarctic.
Oh, right, yeah, oh, yeah, right. That was the one, I think that was done at Ealing, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, that was, they got the snow machine.
Yes. Yes, it shows you how people, the nonsense, you know, you get permission to go off work if you've got a slight cold, but in those days, on Scott of the Antarctic, we had an artificial snow machine which made real snow.
Yeah.
It was artificial, but it made real snow.
Yeah.
And we had an enormous propeller, which made a wind, you know, a terrific wind that blew you over nearly, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And although I was wearing overcoats and things, I caught a very bad cold, and I was staggering about the set. And someone came up, a doctor, and said, "You've got pneumonia." And I had 2 days off with pneumonia.
Pneumonia, yeah. I can believe it, yeah. And, I think this Scott of the Antarctic, was this the one that John Mills was in?
Yes.
Right, yeah.
It was an interesting thing that happened to me, because first of all, when the producers first conceived the story, before they'd got any actors or anything, they said, well, obviously we have to get some wonderful background stuff. And they got a cameraman, a man called Borrowdale, to go to the Antarctica. He wasn't allowed to take the Technicolor camera because it was obviously very dodgy to go all that way in those
Indeed.
So he had a small camera with a single film called Monopack, which was a very bad film because everything was blue.
Yeah.
You know? And that was that. And he got some lovely stuff of long shots of icebergs and things. That was to establish the atmosphere. Then they said, well, we haven't got the cast yet, but why not send a cameraman to get some closer stuff of mountains with snow? And they got another cameraman to go to Norway.
Yeah.
And Norway at that time that he went was in the winter, when the sun never rose more than about 10 degrees, so the sunlight was orange. Then they got the same cameraman to go to Switzerland. This time they knew they'd have some sleighs and dogs and things, so they got doubles. They hadn't cast the film yet, and they got a lot of stuff with the sleighs going down mountains. Well, then they got the cast, and then they called me in to photograph the film in the studio. And the studio at Ealing was very small. It's in my book, incidentally. It's a tiny stage, and it just had some 3-ply cutouts for mountains and a white backing, and that was all. And I had to try to match all these 3 diverse color sequences with the stuff in the studios, and it was very, very difficult. But Technicolor did a fantastic job of matching it in the laboratory. They should have had an Oscar for that.
Yeah. Tell me about, I think another one at about that time, Under Capricorn, about which I know nothing because I didn't see it. I don't know anything about the film. Under Capricorn.
Well, Hitchcock had made Rope,
Yeah.
which was an innovation because it was done, it was all in one room.
Yep.
And it was rather like today, this is before television became that big, but it was rather like a television play. It was all in one room,
Right.
with the camera panning all over the place.
Yeah.
And it was made in 2 weeks.
Yes.
And Hitchcock realized what a great thing it would be to make a film in a couple of weeks, which
Right.
was obviously a terrific financial advantage. So he then became much more ambitious and had the script of Under Capricorn with a big cast of Ingrid Bergman and Joe Cotton
Yeah.
and Mike and one or two others, I forget their names. But it was a big film, but he wanted to do it the same technique. In other words, we did the whole reel in one take.
Yes.
You know, the average sequence you do it, about a few seconds.
That's right, yeah.
It's all cut together afterwards.
Yeah.
This he shot the whole thing. So the camera certainly was ubiquitous. It had to go all over the place. And on one scene, for instance, it went through the front door, turned right into the kitchen, dialogue, back through there, in through the circular hall, into another passage, into the drawing room, more dialogue. 10 minutes is a long time on a take.
Yeah.
And I had to light it, all of it. I had to light sometimes 6 or 8 sets.
Just let me stop you there and say, I do appreciate a little of what you're saying about that, having seen some television work being done. I mean, how many people did you, as you say, you're chasing around with a camera from part to part, room to room and all the rest of it. How many, and then you've got to light it, how many people had you got with you? How many, I don't know, for want of a better phrase, labour? You couldn't have done it all yourself, could you?
Oh, no. What happened was that the sets were composed in such a way that electronically a set would slide apart. Right. There'd be a gap.
Yeah.
And so we could get the camera through.
Yeah.
And then as we turned over there, this set would silently, not very silently, I must say, close. And then the camera would go on, and I had electricians carrying lamps.
Yeah.
I had them hiding under the table until the camera had gone by. And then I had lamps from the spot rail fading in or out on dimmer shutters. It was the most complex thing you can imagine. And the funniest thing of all, it was tragic that we didn't photograph the actual filming of it, of this one scene, because the camera had to go over the top of a Georgian table while they were having dinner. And at the end of the table, Ingrid Bergman was sitting down. And Hitch wanted the camera to track from the one end, long ways, right the way through to a big close-up of Ingrid, but he couldn't because the table was littered with candelabra and wine and glasses and knives and forks and spoons. So what, I don't know whose idea it was, but what we did, we actually, it was a prop table, and we cut it in sections. And I think there were 4 sections, or maybe 6 sections, and the actors were around it. Now, if the camera had to go over the top of all these things, you can imagine it would have been on top of her head, so even a silly shot couldn't do it. But he wanted to be low, so we literally sort of skidded on the top of the table. So what happened was, he started, and as the camera started to surge forward, the actor, everything was stuck on, by the way, everything was stuck on. Each actor would grab his section of the table and fall backwards on a mattress.
Good
Can
Lord.
you imagine that?
Yes, I can. I
so
see what you mean.
If you could have seen it, you would have died with laughter.
Absolutely,
because to see these actors solemnly falling over like the Dead Sea being parted, and it was incredible because it worked. We went straight up into a close-up of Ingrid Bergman, and when we went upstairs into her bedroom, we went down a passage and entered her bedroom. Instead of going over the bed to get a nice close-up, we would have had to take so much time that as we approached, the bed electronically came up like that, so we had a close-up. Well, we would rehearse for one day and then shoot and do the whole reel in one. So we could do the whole thing. It took longer than 2 weeks, I tell you. It took about 4 weeks at least. But the thing was that the noise of all this happening was that you could hardly hear the voices speak.
No.
So what we did is what we call wild track. So the actors would speak the lines, there'd be microphones there, and they'd record the substance of the thing, and then later on in the dubbing theatre,
put them back on.
They would put the dialogue back. But if you could have seen us opening walls, holding lamps, hiding, darting forwards, fading in and out, it was just and the whole thing was, it was almost a disaster, and Hitchcock knew this, because the essence of good filmic work is rhythm.
Yes.
Rhythm in the movement, the cutting.
Yes.
If I'm talking to you and the camera's on you, camera's on me, over the shoulder, close-ups.
That's right, yeah.
And a good editor can lose a dialogue line if he doesn't, you want to change it, you do what you like. You can get rhythm, you can make it faster, you can make it slower, whatever. But if you have to do it all in one, and the camera has to move laboriously around, although Hitch had some good ideas of actors turning, but it was artificial, and we lost the tempo.
Yeah. Did you, I mean, we're talking about serious luminaries here. You talk about Joseph Cotton and Ingrid Bergman and people like this. Did their professionalism preclude the sort of tantrums that you might have got from second-rate people in the face of these difficulties and all this confusion? Did they get ratty about it, or were they above that?
There was a bit of that, but I don't remember anything really dramatic happening.
No.
I know Joe Cotton had a great sense of humour, because he told me that we had this crane which came from America. It was electric, this crane, and reasonably silent. That was the trouble. It was so silent. You never know where. You never knew whether it was going to go over your feet. It went over Hitchcock's foot once.
Yes.
And it rested on his foot, and he didn't say cut until the scene was over.
Good Lord.
That was wonderful. But the fact was that it was so noisy that you didn't hear the crane anyway.
No.
And Cotton told me that he was terrified when the camera would be following him.
Yes.
That it was going to knock him over, because it was a swift crane that would go through,
Yeah.
And there was one wonderful line he said when, with actors, if there's a two-shot, they're looking at each other.
Yes.
If one actor, what they call upstages the other actor,
Yes.
you see more of his face.
That's right.
And ipso
Less
facto
of
you
that
see
one.
less of
Yeah,
that one. It's one of those.
Yeah.
Well, in one instance, when for some reason Ingrid Bergman was upstaging Joe, the continuity girl, as she always does, calls out, "What size shot is it, for the camera operator?" And Joe said, "It's a Swedish 50-50.
Swedish 50. Very nice. We must move now anyway to the health problems, because this is the early 50s, when you became, actually by the standards of the day, quite ill.
Yes, I was working on. I had finished a film with Henry Hathaway, Legend of the Lost.
Yes.
And I came back to my adored Paris, and I was living it up. I was going out every night and going all over the place. And I was cleaning my teeth when I was living in Montmartre at the time, cleaning my teeth, and I sort of spat a certain amount of blood, and I thought this was rather strange. I didn't feel any harm,
No.
Anyway, the next morning I had an examination, and 3 doctors disagreed. One of them said he thought it was a spot on the lung, and the other 2 said they didn't find it, but they said the best thing to do was to check it in London. And I was naturally scared now.
Yes, of course.
And I went back to London, and a doctor examined me, terrified me, because he was very nonchalant, and he had a black patch over his eye. And he came round at night, I remember, and he said, "Yes, you've got a spot." He said, "The best thing to do is to have a pneumothorax where they collapse the lung,
Oh, right.
And you'd better go away for about 6 months in a sanatorium and so on." I was absolutely bowled over, because I didn't feel any worse. And after he'd gone, because I realised I've never I'm not the sort of person that saves up money ready for a rainy day, and I thought, bang goes my home and everything.
That's right.
I was married with 2 kids. It was terrifying.
Yeah.
And there was a woman in one of the adjoining streets who was a doctor,
Right.
a chest doctor.
Yes.
And she herself was riddled with tuberculosis. Interesting. And we got her round, and she said, "Well, I can't find out anything." She said, I don't think you've got anything. You certainly shouldn't have a pneumothorax." She said, "There's a man in London you should see." I went to see him, and he said, "Well, it's so slight." He said, go away for 3 months." He said, "Because you might be the worrying kind. Go away for 3 months and come back." So I went away to Switzerland, enjoyed myself. I put on weight immediately.
Yes.
And after 6 weeks, the doctor there said, "I think this is ridiculous. You ought to go home."
Yeah.
And at that time, I had this offer to do a film, Pandora and the Flying Dutchman.
Indeed.
And the doctor I said to the doctor, "Can I do it?" He said, "Oh yes." He said, "You better have a nice sleep in the afternoon." I said, "No, forget that." I said, "In the film business, you don't sleep.
No.
You're up all day. You get up at dawn, you know." And he said, "Well, you can do it. Off you go." You know, that was it. So it was a scare, but it wasn't really serious.
Now, Pandora and the Flying Dutchman, I think James Mason and Ava Gardner, I think. In actual fact, strangely enough, I can remember when I first saw that film. I saw that film with my father in Newquay.
Really?
In a little cinema in Newquay. And I remember him taking me to see it. We're on holiday down there. So I remember the film, well, that much of it, quite vividly. Talk to me about how long did it take to make that?
Oh, it was we had a location in Spain, Tossa de la Mer.
Yes.
And that was about 3 or 4 weeks. And we came back to England and made the film at Shepperton. And that was probably about 12 to 15 weeks.
I think the director, what was it, Lewin, the director?
Al Lewin,
yes.
Awfully nice man.
Yes, quite. Now, I think, since we can talk about these people again, I think James Mason became a friend, didn't he?
Oh, he did, because I moved to Switzerland just after that, and we were neighbours. I mean, he lived about a quarter of a mile away. We used to play tennis a couple of times a week. And he was a very lovely man, and he, if I had a script, he would read it, tell me what he thought of it. Sometimes he'd act it, which was great fun.
Oh, right.
And awfully nice man. He was one of the problems we had on Pandora was that we had to do what were supposedly sort of tender love sequences in the moonlight.
Yeah.
And we did that day for night, which was very bad because James, like David Niven, for instance, both the same. A lot of actors can't stand light on the face, which I understand. I can't either.
Yeah, quite.
Some people, like Tyrone Power, had a physiognomy which was quite interesting. That his eyebrows sort of came out. They acted as gobos, you know.
Yes.
That he could stand reflector light.
Yeah.
John Wayne could too, and people that a lot of them could, but some couldn't. So James tried to bear up. I put gauzes all over the place, but in the end we had to abandon doing the love scenes on the beach because, Spanish summer light.
Yes.
It was too hot.
Yes.
We did them in the studios afterwards.
Right. Now, I think the next film was the African Queen about the same time. Must have been. Yeah,
Yes.
51. I mean, that must have been an incredible thing to do. It's an incredible film to watch, let alone to do.
Yes, it was a very realistic film. That was a lot of people said that one of the attractions was that you knew you were there, which was true. There was nothing phony about it. No sets, no film studios. It was done in Africa.
Yeah.
In fact, it was done in the Belgian Congo.
Yeah.
What happened was that John Huston went on a recce to find. We were supposed to do it in Lake Victoria in that location.
Yes.
And which was British territory.
Yes.
But he went there and said he didn't like it because it was too pretty, like Maidenhead, he said.
Yeah, yeah.
And so he went off and he disappeared for a couple of weeks, and we thought, oh my God, what's happened to him? He might have been eaten by a crocodile, we didn't know.
No.
Then he sent a cable saying, found the perfect place in the Belgian Congo. To the consternation of the producer, who had to he knew that this is a different setup.
Indeed.
Foreign money, things like that. And anyway, we went, of course, and it was a 2 days jeep ride from Stanleyville.
Yes.
Right in the middle of the jungle. I mean, it was we cut away a jungle just to put tents and things, which were made of dried up leaves and things. And we were there for weeks.
Yeah.
Black mamba snakes were there and all kinds of things.
We were just talking very briefly about we just started to talk about the making of the African Queen. Another two legends. Humphrey Bogart, Katie Hepburn. I mean, it's difficult. What was Bogart like?
Well, he was a contradiction in a way because he played the quintessential tough guy, didn't he?
Yes.
And he was a very nice man, he was a sweet man. I mean, you might say to him, "Good morning, Bogart." He said, "What's good about it?" I mean, that sort of thing.
Yes, quite.
He really was at heart awfully nice. And his wife was charming. She came out.
Laurie McCall, yes.
But they had this tough exterior all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, they bantered with each other, but it was in a
Was that I mean, you may be able to answer this. Was it a happy marriage? I suspect it was.
Oh, definitely.
Yes.
Definitely. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, she... I mean, they had two lovely children because
Yeah.
I went to their place when we finished the film. My God, we went to Hollywood, and my wife and I, we stayed at their place for a while. They had a lovely house, lovely kids, and they were great people because it was a terrible shock when he died.
Oh, yeah.
Throat cancer.
Throat cancer, wasn't it?
But when I first met him, it was at a kind of party, a pre-production party. I met him the first time. He said, "Listen, Cardiff," he said, "you see this face? It's got lines and wrinkles in it." He says, "It's taken me a good number of years to develop these things." He says, "So I don't want you to light them out and make me look like a goddamn fag." So I said, Bogey, I must admit, I've had lots of problems with actors' faces, but your face has got me beat. I said, "There's too much dissipation there."
Yeah.
I said, "So you'll be all right." So he started to laugh, and I laughed, and he said, "All right, put down that sissy drink." I was drinking a beer or something.
Yeah.
"Put down that sissy drink and have a real drink. Have a double whiskey. Come on."
Yeah.
So that was it. We had a big friendship.
Yes.
I didn't have too many double whiskeys, though, but there you are.
No, quite. And of course, his partner, Katie Hepburn, another magnificent legend.
Yes, she was the sort of person that didn't want to be considered a fragile, feminine woman. She didn't want to be sort of put in a niche as a sort of fragile, vulnerable woman.
Right.
I mean, once or twice I remember distinctly that anyone would put their hand out as she was getting off a raft with a river full of crocodiles, you know, you instinctively want to help her step on land.
Yeah.
She'd knock it aside. She wouldn't be. I know how to get off a raft, for Christ's sake. You know, she was that sort of tough girl, and she loved to go walking in the woods sometimes with Houston because the thrill of the animals. She had no worry about danger and things like that. So she was quite a toughie, and yet, in a strange way, she was very feminine. She was a very intellectual person. I mean, she was very intelligent.
Yes. Yeah.
Right at the beginning, I tried to talk her out of having lipstick because I know that on some films in Technicolor, lipstick's always a bit exaggerated.
Yes.
And she drew the line of that. She said, "Well, I'm just going to have a little bit." But she was a remarkably resilient sort of person. She was one of the early victims when we were all very sick.
Yes.
And that was a terrible story because we went to the Belgium Congo thinking, "Oh my God, this is going to be terrible," and it wasn't.
Right.
I mean, we were going into a region of the Congo where the tsetse fly was dominant, you know, and the only few people in the nearby village that could help carry equipment were all lepers, you know. So this was quite an environment to start with, and we thought, "Oh my God!" And when we got to this made-up camp,
Yes.
the first day we were horrified because everything we possessed, like a comb or a pencil, ashtray, anything to do, a pipe, anything, was covered in green mildew from the excessive damp.
Yeah.
So we thought this was the end, you know. There'd be a lot of crosses where the film unit used to be.
Yeah.
But it wasn't so. There was one case where the makeup man had peritonitis, and we had to send out. We just saved his life because it was a 2 days jeep ride. That
Absolutely.
was a dramatic thing. But that was it. We thought, well, the next location was, in fact, in Lake Victoria, Murchison Falls. We thought we were going to have a holiday. And when we got there, of course, it's changed instantly. We became sick. We didn't know. We were living on a houseboat, a huge houseboat.
Right.
And we got doctors in because we were sick, vomiting, diarrhea, everything. And Katie was one of the worst because she had to act, you know, and her face was green. She was vomiting, and she had a bucket by the side of the camera, and she'd vomit and come back again. She was very tough. She'd never give in. And we never found out what was wrong. And we had temperatures of 105 a lot of the time, you know, and we was falling over. We had to stop work once because we were so ill we couldn't get out of bed. Another doctor would come and say, "We just doesn't understand." It was absolutely a mystery. And the biggest mystery was that Bogart and Houston were never sick. They were the only two on the unit who were never sick.
Right.
So that should have been a message, but it wasn't. And just a few days before we finished the picture, some of us lost 30 pounds in weight. We were like skeletons. We were like people from Belsen. And we were staggering about. And a few days before we finished, we got yet another doctor. Oh, by the way, the previous doctors said, "Look, they're undernourished. They've got to be fed." And they got 30 sheep from Nairobi to come over. And we put them on the bank. And the next morning, they'd all disappeared. They'd been eaten by the crocodiles. Anyway, we got the last doctor in, and he went immediately to the core of the whole problem, which should have been obvious to anybody, and it wasn't. He found that the filter on the ship that was taking up water wasn't there.
Oh, God.
We were drinking pure
Neat.
river water with the droppings of hippos and crocodiles.
And what was Bogart drinking?
He only drank whiskey. And
There's a moral there.
Yeah, they never touched water.
No.
Bogart used to say fish make love in it. He never touched water. He said fish make love in it. So that was that. That was why they were never sick.
Talk to me, if you will, about the making of The Master of Ballantrae, and more particularly, perhaps, again, another legend, Errol Flynn.
He was a legend. He was exactly as people thought he would be. I mean, sometimes a terrific phony facade is put on some people, a veneer of toughness or something. Like in Hollywood, you know, they take photographs of the big stars going out hunting or something to make them seem masculine, so if they're quite the contrary sometimes. But in the case of Flynn, he was exactly as people thought he would be. He was a pirate and a lovable person in many ways. I mean, I think a lot of people envied him in a way because they like to be like that themselves, you know. He was unabashed. He made no secret. He'd go after your wife or your girlfriend without thinking twice about it, you know.
Yes, yeah.
And he had a terrific sense of humor. I mean, there's one story he told me where he was in a restaurant and he heard some drunken American at the nearby table saying, "That's Errol Flynn, I don't think much of him," you know, and he was pulling him down. And Errol finally couldn't bear it anymore. He got up and stood up at the table and started to talk to him. And he stood with his arms.
Yes.
It was in the gesture that a jiu-jitsu would make. The right arm is parallel with the left, and the right arm can hit the throat, you know, dart out, and the left can go lower down, which we must have mentioned. But
indeed,
the fact was that he was ready to hit this man.
Yeah.
And the other man stood up, and he had the same position with his arms.
Yes.
And Errol saw that, so he said, I'm a white belt." And the other guy said, "I'm a black belt." So Errol said, "Say what you like, pal."
Very wise.
And went back to the table.
Quite so.
He was always telling jokes about himself, but he was terrific to work with. Great fun.
Well, it's been an absolute delight. I can't remember enjoying anything ever so much. I do look forward to seeing you again sometime.
That's very kind.
And thank you for taking the time to come and see us once again. I do look forward to seeing you again, Jack. Thank you very, very much indeed.
It has been a pleasure.
Thank you very much indeed. That was Jack Cardiff then.